Hello there and welcome to this afternoon session for the ABARES 2022 Outlook conference. I'm so glad you could join us this afternoon virtually and online. My name is Nikolai Beilharz. I present the breakfast program on ABC Radio in Adelaide, but prior to that role, I've been working with the Rural Department and the Country Hour with the ABC for about the past 15 years. So it's really lovely to be able to be here this afternoon with you all and still feel like I'm keeping my hands across farming and agriculture and being able to take part in part of this Outlook conference. So this afternoon, we will be talking about drought resilient farms, how we can ensure that farms and farmers in Australia can try and prepare for droughts as well as react to them. A little bit of housekeeping to get through to start off with. You'll be able to submit and upvote questions during the presentations on the menu on the left. We will have a live Q&A at the end of this session. We've got some pre-recorded videos that we'll get to in a moment, which will help explain and set up our conversation this afternoon. We will try to get to as many of your questions as we can. So do get them in early, and that'll give us a good chance to be able to try and address them. If our speakers this afternoon have given their permission, their slides will be available in the resources tab for you to download. And this session will be recorded and available to catch up with for the next 24 hours as well. Well, as I mentioned, I probably don't need to tell you that farmers and those in agriculture are amongst those who are most affected by drought, most directly feel the impacts of it when it comes through. And the 2018-19 droughts led to some renewed interest in drought preparedness and the resilience of Australian farmers. In other words, trying to make sure that you can be proactive as well as reactive. Now, we have seen a return to more favourable conditions in some parts of the country. And one of the arguments is, well, now is the time to try and take on this challenge of how farmers can best prepare for drought. But how do you define that? How do you measure it? It can be a little bit more complicated than just there's been no rain or there's been a little bit of rain. And what steps can farmers take to actually try and become more resilient? So out in the paddock, what kind of difference can be made? So we will look at a range of initiatives this afternoon in this session that are currently being undertaken by industry and by the government, including some on-farm actions and emerging research and innovation under the Future Drought Fund. And then we'll have a panel discussion after that as well. But let's start by heading out and about. We've got a number of pre-recorded videos from USQ hubs from nodes in Armidale and Lismore, and from New South Wales farmer Matt Coddington.
My name's Lou Hogan. I live at Armidale in northern New South Wales, where I produce prime lamb and beef with my husband. I'm also the manager of the Armidale node of the Drought Hub for southern Queensland and northern New South Wales. I wanted to contribute to the Drought Hub because, like all other farmers, we're experiencing the impacts of climate change on our livestock business on a daily basis, and particularly the impacts of droughts. During my lifetime, I've seen droughts increase in their intensity and also their frequency. And the counterbalance to that, which we're experiencing this year, where we have excessively wet conditions and as a result of that, also very intense and damaging storms. We know that farmers have long-lived experience in managing variability, but with this increased intensity and frequency of droughts, it's really time to look around, hone our skills, look for new tools that can increase our resilience to drought in the future. That's why I wanted to contribute to the Drought Hub, so that I could work with farmers and rural communities to improve the viability of our rural businesses and to protect our soils, our waterways and the biodiversity on our agricultural land. If we can improve the viability of our rural businesses, protect the soils, waterways and biodiversity on our agricultural land, then our resilience for the future will be much improved. And we will have the flow-on effect of happier families on farms and vibrant rural communities. There's an old saying that the best time to prepare for drought is when it's wet and it's green. And that might be in terms of putting money in the bank, but equally it might be in terms of making substantial investments on farm to improve drought resilience, whether it's polypipe and troughing to secure water, confinement feeding areas, or the use of a new agri-tech tool. One of the really important decisions that livestock producers make during a drought is whether to maintain sheep and cattle on farm and spend lots of money feeding them through the drought, or to sell and restock at a later date. This is a crucial financial decision for the resilience of the business going forward, and we want to support farmers with tools and strategies to make the best business decision possible. We want to help farmers make really good investment decisions, understand the return on capital from that decision, and really make the right investments for the future. We also want to work with the service providers who support our farmers on a daily basis. So whether you're a spraying contractor, an agronomist or an advisor, we want your business to come through a drought period being resilient and able to continue to provide service to farmers. And this continues to be really important, or becomes increasingly important as we have less and less labour on farm and more reliance on external providers. We have a range of technologies and strategies that we want to encourage both farmers and also students studying rural science at the University of New England to take up as part of through the Armidale node of the Drought Hub. Firstly, we want to increase the use of long-range rainfall forecasts so that farmers can be prepared and planning for appropriate cropping programs and livestock programs based on rainfall forecasts. Secondly, we want to promote the use of continuous feed budgeting so that we're always matching the amount of pasture available to the stocking rate. And of course, ensuring that we maintain a minimum level of ground cover to protect our soils from erosion. So these are just some of the ideas that we have for the Armidale node of the Drought Hub in northern New South Wales, but we're always keen to hear from others across the region about their ideas and their thoughts of what we could do to make a difference in their region.
My name is Lorraine Gordon. I'm Director of Strategic Projects, the Regenerative Agriculture Alliance and Farming Together at Southern Cross University. And Southern Cross University is a partner in the Northern New South Wales, Southern Queensland Drought Hub. The Regenerative Agriculture Alliance and the Farming Together team at Southern Cross University are very focused on helping farmers to remain resilient in a changing climate into the future. So we're very much focused on helping them to adopt regenerative techniques in farming. It's a new way of farming that will set us up to be able to cope with the many challenges that are coming with climate change. And those challenges do include drought, floods. What we try and do is use applied on-the-ground research and bring farmers along that journey with us. We try and answer some of the very complex problems and challenges that they're having and work with them to come up with the research solutions that can actually help them to remain resilient and sustainable into the future. Setting ourselves up to be drought resilient basically means having landscape knowledge. So equipping ourselves with an understanding of complex adaptive systems, landscape function, and farming in a holistic manner. It also means avoiding some of the practices of the past. And I guess you could say the regenerative way that really throws out some of those previous practices includes, from a cropping sense, not over-tilling the soil, not spraying out paddocks so that we're left with paddocks of bare soil that are then exposed to the elements such as dust storms or floods, where we see our topsoil flying off to the New Zealand Alps or flowing down the river systems. So it's really about questioning our practices and really starting to stop and think, is this the best thing for the landscape? It's all about having that thorough understanding of your own landscape function in your particular bioregion or on your particular farm. Firstly, I think what the Drought Hub does is bring people together to collaborate and build capacity within a bioregion to solve these complex problems that are going to continue to come at us. Secondly, what the Drought Hub does is it actually equips us with the knowledge and the tools, the skills and the experience to be able to be ready for the next climatic disaster that comes. I think the Drought Hub can achieve many things, and of course together we're stronger, so it's all about collaboration and capacity building to achieve impact.
Hi, I'm Matthew Coddington and I live on a 4,000 hectare farm called Roseville Park, 35 kilometres south of Dubbo in central western New South Wales. And today I'm here to tell you about the Farm Resilience Program. Farmers are never thought of as CEOs, but they run complex multi-million-dollar operations that are often highly leveraged businesses, and farmers are frequently making multi-million-dollar decisions that could put those businesses at risk. There are 4 key factors that will affect farming in the future, and these are the climate. It's more extreme, there's more droughts, more fires, more floods from violent storms and cyclones. The second one is that over coming decades, the farmer retirements will lead to around $400 billion in asset transfers to the next generation, who will be taking on massive risk and debt. The third issue will be our right to farm and our long-term food security, which will need a long-term vision and plan from governments and industry to protect. And the fourth issue is relevant to all of Australian businesses, and that by 2030, there will be a labour shortage of 3 million employees, leading to restricted business capacity and growth. To overcome these issues on our farm, we are using regenerative farming practices, expanding our fodder storage capacity, and we have improved our water infrastructure. Being a seed stock producer of merino and terminal genetics, our stud operation, we have developed our genetics to produce more with less and be more disease resistant and more feed efficient. We have a diversified farm with different income streams from multiple enterprises, which has enabled us to increase turnover and drought-proof the business financially. We have expanded our farming area by buying and leasing neighbouring properties, and we have bought in machinery, technology and equipment to be more labour efficient. We have also got good mentors and advisors to help us to develop the different aspects of our farming business. The work that we are doing will help drought resilience in our region through on-farm innovation, through assisting farmers with improved decisions based on climate data, implementing new farming systems to improve water use efficiency to improve the landscape, and giving them options to minimise risk and grow their businesses to withstand financial drought and hardship. From the business resilience coaching, we have redefined our goals and our business strategy for the short and long-term future to be multi-generational and to be financially secure into the future regardless of the season. We have a business coach that holds us accountable to improving our financial security and to also manage our triple bottom line. The most exciting part of the Business Resilience Program is that it has given us access to a very good business coach who has a farming background and access to a diverse cross-section of farming businesses with different size enterprises and are at a different stage of their farming careers. These farmers think outside the box and they're not afraid to be brutally honest to help each other improve their business resilience. Although we already run a very successful and profitable business, we are hoping that the Business Resilience Program will take us from being a good business to being a great business to withstand the challenges that our industry and climate will throw at us. Thank you for your time today. If you'd like any more information on our business, Google rosevilleparkmerinos.com.au. Thank you.
That is New South Wales farmer Matt Coddington, or as he put it, the CEO of Roseville Park. I quite like that line. Let's now hear from a senior economist at ABARES, Neal Hughes.
Hello everybody. Today I'm going to provide an overview of some work that ABARES has been doing recently on new drought indicators. This work's feeding into a number of initiatives in the department at the moment, including monitoring and evaluating the Future Drought Fund, and also a new drought early warning system, which is currently being developed by ABARES with the help of CSIRO and the BOM. So the definition and measurement of drought is a really difficult problem, but it's one that remains fundamental to many aspects of drought policy. So firstly, we have this age-old question of, is a given farm or location currently in drought or not? So while we have largely moved away from explicit drought support triggers, this kind of information on the extent and severity of drought is still really important in informing the government's drought response. It also has a range of other use cases, including for drought forecasting and also potentially drought insurance products. Then we have a range of longer term questions around drought preparedness and resilience. So here we're interested in understanding firstly how climate change may be increasing the frequency and severity of drought over time, but also in understanding how farms are adapting to those changes. Are farms getting more or less sensitive to drought over time? So there are some good reasons why the measurement of drought has proven to be such a difficult problem for such a long period of time, and that's because it's just very complicated. We'd like to be able to draw a simple line from low rainfall to low farm profits, but in practice there are a lot of other factors that need to be taken into account. So the impacts of drought on farm businesses depend heavily on the farming context, the location and the type of agriculture that we're talking about. They depend heavily on the management decisions made by farmers in response to drought conditions, particularly around crop planting and destocking. And they also depend heavily on what's going on in commodity markets. So generally in Australia, we tend to have spikes in grain and fodder prices during drought years, and these have a big bearing on the financial outcomes of farms in drought. So in order to isolate the effects of drought on farm outcomes, you need some kind of model. And this work that ABARES has been doing on drought indicators makes use of our Farm Predict model. Farm Predict's a statistical model of farm businesses based on our long-running broadacre farm survey data. The basic idea then is that you take weather data, you run that through your model, and you obtain simulated farm outcome data. In this case, we focus particularly on farm profits. Once you have that, you can then define a range of different drought measures. So firstly, these short-term drought indicators, is a given location or farm in drought or not, and also your longer-term drought risk sensitivity type measures. How sensitive or exposed are farms to drought, and are they becoming more or less sensitive to drought over time? So here's an example of ABARES outcome-based drought indicator for the recent 2019 drought year. So on the left we have a standard rainfall percentile-based measure, and on the right our new outcome-based drought indicator that's coming out of our modelling. So the map on the left is telling you at each location whether the farm experienced low rainfall during the financial year, whereas the map on the right is trying to get more at whether the weather conditions in that year led to a significant decrease in farm profits. And when you look closely, you can see that those two things can be quite different. So in that region in central New South Wales, southern Queensland, you see that the outcome-based measure shows a greater drought extent than the rainfall data shows. So here the modelling has taken into account the fact that in addition to low rainfall, we had extremely high temperatures. We also had some dry conditions prior to the start of the financial year that compounded those impacts. And on top of that, we had very high fodder and grain prices due to the drought, which worsened the financial outcomes for the livestock farms that tend to dominate in that area. Conversely, we see like an almost opposite story in the major grain growing areas in Western Australia. So while rainfall was below average, and that this would have contributed to lower yields, farms in that area were able to maintain their profits because of the really high grain prices due to the drought in Eastern Australia. And in some cases, those farms even benefited from the drought conditions in that year. So here we have some farm drought risk results. This chart is showing sensitivity to drought over the last 30 years for the entire broadacre farming sector. And the main story there is that farm profits have become more sensitive to drought on average. And that's been driven mostly by an increase in the amount of cropping activity over that time. So beginning from around the mid-1990s, we saw a pretty steady increase in the percentage of farmland, particularly on mixed farms and sheep farms, that was getting devoted towards more intensive cropping activity. And that naturally tends to increase the drought risk of the farming sector as a whole. If we look towards the end there, that trend towards more cropping has actually stabilised, but we still see a bit of a spike in drought risk. And that one at the end is more what I would call a drought fatigue effect. So there has been a run of poor conditions for a number of farmers over the last 5 years, particularly the last 2, and that tends to just in itself make farmers more sensitive to drought, particularly for livestock farmers, because it reduces their herd sizes and their stocks of grain and fodder. We would expect that to turn around a little bit with the better conditions we've seen over the last 2 years. So there's a very good reason why farms have been willing to shift into cropping and take on this extra risk, and that's because it's been highly profitable to do so. So there is a clear risk-return trade-off that farmers are managing. They, in some cases, are going to be willing to make changes to their operation which increase their exposure to their sensitivity to drought, if it also increases their average profitability. Now, having said that, there are limits to how much risk farmers are willing to take, and farmers are going to highly value any reduction in their drought risk, particularly if they're able to achieve that without reducing their average profits. So in recent years, we've seen a number of adaptations emerging that are helping farmers to improve their productivity under dry conditions and reduce their sensitivity to drought. One of those has been a bit of a shift back towards mixed farming and livestock farming and away from cropping in some regions. So this chart shows change over the last 10 years or so in the proportion of land set up for cropping on broadacre farms. And you can see that particularly on the more inland fringe of the cropping zone, you've seen a reduction in the amount of cropping activity in those areas that are lower rainfall and also a bit more drought exposed. So this has been necessarily a brief introduction, but there is a lot more information on ABARES' website, and I'm happy to take questions, of course, in today's session. Thank you.
Thanks to Neal Hughes from ABARES for that presentation, and he will join us in just a moment when we get our panel discussion underway. But some interesting things that have already come through really in the videos that I've seen, I think, in terms of farmers saying they realise very, very much so that they need to change practices and to stay kind of nimble and reactive and indeed proactive as well. So we'll talk more about that. But I would like to welcome all the members of our panel this afternoon. Brent Finlay from the Future Drought Fund Consultative Committee. He's the chair of the Consultative Committee, has 40 years experience in the agricultural sector. He runs a sheep and cattle property in southeast Queensland and also has an extensive career in farming advocacy as well with his work with the National Farmers Federation. Cindy Cassidy from the Southern New South Wales Drought Resilience Adoption and Innovation Hub. She is the director of that hub, where her extensive networks and long history in agriculture has been called on to try and help shape this next phase of innovation in the sector. Professor John McHugh is the director of the Southern Queensland, Northern New South Wales Drought Resilience Adoption Hub, and he's also the Executive Director of the University of Southern Queensland's Institute for Resilient Regions, which focuses on some of the social sciences and engagement and things like that to try and assist regional communities and build their resilience. And Dr. Neal Hughes, who is a Senior Economist at ABARES, who we've just heard from, and has over 15 years of experience as a researcher at ABARES with a focus on water markets, water policy, and work with the Murray-Darling Basin and drought climate change on farms. So I'm sure you'll all join me in virtually welcoming them to this panel discussion. Brent Finlay, if we can start with you, we've seen some videos there of what some people are hoping they'll be able to get out of initiatives like the Future Drought Fund. It's a huge amount of money. It's $100 million a year. There's obviously a lot of different projects, a lot of different programs that take place under the Future Drought Fund. How do you make sure that you're getting bang for buck? How do you make sure that you're using that money wisely?
Nikolai, yeah, great question, and no, really important. This is taxpayers' money, so there is $100 million every year to be dispersed from the fund. I think it's incredible that there is actually a fund that focuses on the future of drought. It's not about in-drought support right now. This is about the future. And we've seen in the videos probably two of the many programs that are in the Future Drought Fund. So part of what the Consultative Committee does and working with the department, but also working with Minister Littleproud, is review how we roll these programs out. That's really important, but also the monitoring and evaluation. The first programs were announced 20 months ago, so we're now starting to build a bit of data. It's still early days for the fund. The fund actually started 2.5 years ago by developing the funding plan. So monitoring and evaluation, getting the data, but also getting the feedback from across all agricultural organisations, directly from farmers, really important. But then collating these numbers that are just starting to build for us now. The great videos we saw today, so many topics that are focused on that we need to continue to focus on supporting farmers, but it's also their businesses, the landscapes in which they farm, and really importantly, it's the communities in which we farm as well. I don't know any farmers who don't want to live in a strong, vibrant, resilient community.
So then how do you measure success? What does success look like? I mean, I guess it would be difficult to get to the point where under a significant drought, farmers don't feel strain.
And I think part of the success will be down the track. Obviously, it's early days yet. Is how, and to me as a farmer, it's sort of how we prepare and the level of people of engagement in the Future Drought Fund, the Future Drought Fund programs now and into the future, but also how quickly we actually respond to the next drought, how quickly we can actually bounce back from the next drought. It's what our farm businesses look like, how we've prepared. It's what our landscapes are. Now, every farmer has a plan about drought. Sometimes they're on a piece of paper, sometimes they're in their head, but they have that. And it's focusing on that. Right now, when we're hearing all the weather events on the eastern seaboard of Australia, but it's continuing that strong focus on drought. And one of the other presenters said, now's the time to actually prepare and focus on it. I couldn't agree more.
John McVeigh, if we can turn to you, we heard in some of the videos about some of those new farming technologies and practices that are being looked at in the Southern Queensland, Northern New South Wales Drought Hub. Regenerative agriculture was one that I think was mentioned a couple of times there. Can you tell us a bit more about these new approaches and where you see the potential for the benefit?
Thank you, Nikolai. Well, our hub, our Southern Queensland, Northern New South Wales hub, like the other hubs around the country, is very much focused on extending and assisting adoption of the latest approaches that we've referred to and we've seen in some of the videos already in this session. So yes, regen agriculture from our node led by Southern Cross University at Lismore, and keeping in mind tremendous challenges that community is going through at the moment, is something that's relevant to the northern rivers of New South Wales. It's relevant right across Australia. And great to hear Matthew Coddington talking about his experience there, for example. So too it goes, my colleague Lou Gordon, who was just on one of those videos as well at UNE at Armidale, really focused on business resilience, business management, considering drought as not just a rainfall issue, but a holistic approach to landscape management, to stock and or crop, depending on what a producer's involved in. So there are plenty of techniques, there are plenty of research outcomes that we've got to continue to extend out to our communities. And certainly in our hub, that's Lismore, Armidale, Narrabri in Northern New South Wales, Stanthorpe, Roma and Longreach in Queensland. So a vast range of industries, but we do believe they can all learn something from one another as we really get going with our hub collaboration.
And I imagine too that that's can be one of the big challenges. You'll always have the pioneering farmers that are happy to roll the dice a little bit and have a go at something new, but then how do you broaden that out to those that maybe are feeling a bit reluctant and want to wait and see?
Exactly, and that's the ongoing challenge. I have a tremendously optimistic view of the future of Australian agriculture, and let's not forget where we've come from. My generation has farmed differently to my parents, to my grandparents, and so too is the next generation. So we've learnt and we've adapted over generations. This hub activity right across the country is about ensuring We're extending, we're supporting adoption, we're supporting commercialisation where possible of the tremendous research we have now, and that we'll conduct in the future.
Cindy, Cassidy, I might bring you in there on that topic of adaptation and how you encourage people to undertake new technologies and new ideas, because you've taken quite a big look at national, international approaches to ag innovation on farm adoption. What are the biggest impediments to some of those things for farmers?
Yeah, that's a great question. Look, when you look around the world, some of the real success stories are the ones where the innovations are being created when they're needed with the people and in the places that they're needed. So that really bringing the end users into the story at the very beginning and really recognising their needs and what their motivations are for the future and what their aspirations are for the future. So in modern agriculture, some of the real challenges for adoption are really an oversupply of information, just so much untargeted, undifferentiated information. And then there are the human aspects, which are, around attitudes and aptitude for risk, and then willingness or ability to change. So that idea of motivation as well as capability. And all of those things are packaged up in the context of, well, we're all time poor. So no one's, everyone's scrambling to get everything done that they need to do and really trying to navigate a path through that. So when we think about the role that the hubs can play in that context, then it's about filtering and targeting information to people when they need it, where they need it, how they need it, in a way that they can actually pick it up and do something tangible with it, helping to narrow down the scope of choices that they're expected, or decisions that they're expected to make at any time, so that they're a manageable set of, things that they're planning to do in their farm businesses or in their communities. One of the things that we're really focusing on is creating the time and the space to sit and understand community or farmer aspiration for their own future, so that we can say, well, actually, these are the set of 2-3 things that you might want to be able to work on over the next 12 or 18 months that will make a real difference in your farm business or in your community. And that has to be a purposeful thing. So in an environment where everyone is so busy and there is so much happening all the time, you have to really purposely create time and space for that conversation and to be really clear on what it is that the communities and farmers are chasing and looking for. We've also got a really significant role, I think, to play in de-risking new technologies, new ideas, new systems. So how do we make them immediately applicable and able to be picked up and used by farmers or in communities in a way that doesn't present an unmanageable risk for their business? And so some of that is around demonstration, some of that's simply providing access, some of that's about providing support services so that they've got help that they need as they need it to make changes. And then I think really thinking about how investment is targeted, how we create investment opportunities that are about the needs of the farmers and the communities in the regions where we're after them. So I think there's some interesting challenges. They're not insurmountable, but modern agriculture, and really John's saying this, modern agriculture is very different to how it has been, and we need to be able to adapt ourselves to that challenge so that we can bring our farmers and our communities on that journey with us.
You mentioned that idea of creating time and space. Can it be harder to encourage people to do that proactively? I guess when there is that notion, I suppose, of when times are good, you don't worry so much about when times might be bad later on.
It is absolutely a challenge, but it's the challenge of modern life. How do we create the time and the space to sit and think strategically, and then to make purposeful decisions and purposeful actions? And I think the kinds of investment that Brent's talking about allows us to buy some time and space. That's a really good use of that money, is to say, well, how do we buy the time and the space to think?
Thank you, Cindy. If we can turn to you, Neal Hughes from ABARES. You noted that we're seeing some changes in the mix of farming activities as, I guess it is really that adaptation response to drier and hotter conditions. What other adaptations is ABARES observing? What industry trends can you try and anticipate for the future?
Yeah, thanks, Nikolai. Yeah, we're seeing a lot of really strong trends that, as the climate has been changing and as drought has been becoming more frequent and more severe, there's been all kinds of new technologies and management practices emerging on farms in response to that. So this has been particularly strong in the cropping sector. We've seen some really consistent gains in productivity over the last decade. There's been a range of new practices, conservation tillage, soil amelioration, the whole range of different practices. And you know, generally speaking, a lot of these technologies are focused around one thing, which is better conserving soil moisture. So handling the fact that we're now getting less rainfall in winter, and better conserving the soil moisture that does arrive in summer, and being able to grow crops with less rain than what we could in the past. If you look outside of cropping in the livestock sector, there's been a bit of a trend towards greater use of purchased fodder and grain, as opposed to being entirely reliant on pasture and rain that falls out of the sky on your farm. So obviously that is one way to partially reduce your exposure to drought, at least to the direct impacts of low rainfall on your farm. But it still potentially leaves this issue about your exposure to the local commodity markets. So in the recent drought, we saw shortages of grain and fodder nationally because of the widespread drought and spikes in those prices. So then the other key trend that we're starting to see now as the livestock sector's shifting more to purchased fodder and grain is more storage. So both on-farm storage of grain and fodder, and also off-farm storage, where there's been some big investments over the last 5 years or so, and that seems to be picking up as well, following on from the droughts that we had. So that would be one really important way that we can improve the drought risk and reduce the sensitivity of the sector if we can have that storage, and so that we can hit another drought event without having such a shortage of grain and fodder.
I guess one of the big questions too will be how collectively as a nation we know that that resilience is increasing, and that you can actually effectively say, yes, we are creating a more enduring, sustainable approach to agriculture in Australia at a national level, but also at regional levels as well. So I might put that to you as the panel. Brent, what's your take on that? How do you know that things are improving?
I think part of it is, and I know within the Future Drought Fund we're talking about, we're developing what are resilience indicators. So that's really a set of indicators for that. And I guess that's one of the beauties of having a fund that's focused on the future. We're not actually responding to what's going on now, and there is in-drought policy that's here now. So we have the ability to do that. I think part of it's also around talking to all the stakeholders, getting information back from the stakeholders. Now, what happened last time? What are you planning on doing next time? Because I know everybody has a strategy, everybody has a thought process. They say, right, well, next time we'll do this. This is how we're going to be better prepared. This is how this hopefully will work in my enterprise or for my community. This is how we're going to respond. So detailed public consultation, detailed feedback, that helps inform those key drought resilience indicators.
I might just quickly go to one of the questions that we've received, and as I mentioned earlier, you can be submitting your questions that you may have for our panel for the next little while. This question says, in the regions where I work across multiple organisations implementing climate change actions, we know what's needed, but we don't have the capacity or resources to do it. Who's going to fund people to do the on-the-ground work that's needed in the next 4 to 8 years, which is the critical period to try and stay under 1.5 degrees of an increase? Brent, Finlay, is that something that the Future Drought Fund can look at, or is that outside your scope?
Well, I think through the Future Drought Fund, we have a number of programs. And as I said, we've sort of discussed 2 of those programs today, sort of around the hubs. And the hubs are very much the interface for farmers to work with. But also, Matt Coddington talked about business resilience planning, that one of the programs that are delivered through all the states. But there's also there's grants, and there's innovation grants, those sort of things, and we keep urging people to keep watching the Future Drought Fund website for where all these programs are released, to look for something there that might be the key for what you're thinking about.
John, if we can come to you, John McVeigh, on that idea of how you measure success, how do you think success is measured when it comes to drought resilience?
It's very much about confidence, I think, Nikolai. Confidence to invest, as has been mentioned already. Now's the time to invest when many producers across the nation are enjoying reasonable prices and good conditions. Not to say there aren't areas still in drought, quite obviously. But the confidence to invest now, as we've heard, in fodder storage, in local water infrastructure, but similarly across the community. Communities recognising as a whole that droughts aren't just about farmers and their decisions on farm, it impacts the whole community. So I think success is measured when we continue to see that sort of confidence in the community, everyone engaging on issues to do with drought preparedness and ensuring resilience in the next drought. That's on farm, it's in the community. I think has been mentioned, it's also about personal, family and community well-being. So regular conversations, the confidence to have those conversations and to actually invest and see the priority for those sorts of investments, particularly in good times, is a real measure of success as we go forward.
Cassidy, that brings up an interesting point that I guess, farming doesn't just exist, and you have to excuse the terrible pun of in a silo by itself, but that it does take in, often farming communities, agriculture really forms the core part of the economy and, keeps the pub going, keeps the footy club open and all those kinds of things. How important is it to work with other government agencies? So I guess, your health, your education, your infrastructure, those kinds of things to make sure that you're getting efficient outcomes that can build community resilience as well as just drought resilience.
Look, those things are critical. So, I mean, the way you've described it, communities depend heavily on agriculture, but agriculture also depends heavily on community. I mean, Brent said, there isn't a farmer that wants to live in a place that doesn't have a vibrant community around it, but it's also the support services and all of the things that it takes to run a farm. A vibrant regional economy brings that to the farming community as well. So it becomes really important. I know that all the hubs have got very close relationships with state government departments and local government agencies, and our hub is no exception to that. So we've got really strong relationships with New South Wales Department of Primary Industries and Local Land Services, with local government agencies as well across southern New South Wales. And really we have those relationships because we see the well-being of the community and the well-being of our farmers being so heavily interlinked. And there is an enormous amount of activity that already occurs within those agencies. And at a hub level, we see that our role is to enhance those and amplify those impacts, and where there's gaps, to help support that. So to find resources and to build capacity and capability where that might currently be missing.
Is that something you've looked at too, Brent, Finlay? Because obviously, I guess one of the great challenges of bureaucracies is getting them all to talk to each other and agree and get things done.
Certainly, and I think it's through I go back to November 19, and we did the first round of public consultation, just the amount of organisations that we were able to meet with, and whether they're every state-based Department of Agriculture engaging with state governments, but also in our public forums that we held, there was many organisations represented there, and to continue to give feedback to them. And one of the things we're looking forward to in the next couple of weeks, now that we can actually travel again with COVID sort of, I guess it's still there, but not as virulent as it once was. We can actually move around this country and start to talk to all these other organisations. Collaboration is a key part of what we're trying to do in the Future Drought Fund. It is an incredible opportunity for all of us, rural and regional Australia. And if we can work together, we can actually make the best of this fund that's been created to build a resilience for future droughts.
And Neal Hughes, if we can come to you, we've been talking, I guess, in the last few moments, about these ideas of how success or a building an adaptation in resilience can be measured. Can that be done at an ABARES level from a kind of a data point of view as well?
Yeah, I think that's what we're trying to get towards with the drought risk, drought sensitivity measures. So they're things that we're now producing for the Future Drought Fund. So drought resilience is a really complicated concept, and it's a hard thing to measure just through numbers, but we think we can measure one component of that, this idea of drought sensitivity, which essentially measures what kind of decline in farm profits farms might experience in a drought. So I think it's really important. Obviously, if we're going to come back in 5 years and make some assessments on how well the Future Drought Fund's going, we can't just look at the industry at the raw data and say, you know, are farms making money or are they not? Because that's going to be pretty much driven by whether it's raining at the time that we're making that assessment or not. So the kind of metrics that we're doing, we're trying to control for the conditions, and we're trying to say, given the conditions farms face, you know, how sensitive are they? But, you know, I think ultimately it will take quite a bit of data to unpack that, and we will probably need to experience more droughts, obviously, to see how the industry's coping and whether we can do any better than we did in the last ones.
I want to take another question from our audience. Just to remind you, if something pops into your head and you do have a burning question, please do submit it, and we'll try and get to as many as we can. This one I think probably is best for you, Brent Finlay. While the FDF is a Commonwealth fund, will the states, oh, and that question's just disappeared. There we go, it's back. Will the states have a part in the administration of these monies? So this person's saying in Queensland, we're just starting with drought preparedness grants to be followed up with a loan component that's yet to be released. So what is the balance of power between federal and state?
It's interesting. Right from the start of the fund, we reached out very early to all the states and the territories to work with them through the fund. And there's a number of programs that are administered, I guess, through the states. So the business resilience planning comes through the states, but also the regional planning processes where we're looking at either local government or groups of local government coming together to build drought resilient plans. So there is already a great connection there, and whenever we travel or planning to travel around Australia, we're certainly reaching out to all the state agriculture ministers and in some cases water ministers, but certainly working with all the departments of agriculture. Again, collaboration. Together we're a lot stronger, and so that's what we encourage. And to date, it's going pretty well. At the start, it was a little bit bumpy with a few states, but it sort of sprung on them with a bit of surprise. But we continue to work and we continue to be persistent.
And so does that mean if a state comes to you and says, hey, we really, really, really think this is the way to go, and it was perhaps a different direction than you were thinking of from, I guess, a more of a national point of view, you follow that lead to a degree?
We're really keen on Nikolai, on feedback, and we're always looking for ideas for future programs to be rolled out for the Future Fund, Future Drought Fund. And I guess that's one of the strengths is that we are adaptable, but and all the ideas don't sit within the Consultative Committee or within the department, and that's why we regularly reach out for ideas that whether they're individuals, organisations, and to your question, state governments as well.
We've had a question through now for Neal Hughes asking, it's a question effectively about irrigation, saying there are a number of different irrigation methods. Australia's been improving the technology when it comes to water application and irrigation technologies over the years. Has that been affecting the resilience of farms?
Yeah, so the results that I presented earlier were just for dryland broadacre farms, but we have done some work looking at the irrigation sector. And yeah, there have been improvements in water use efficiency in the Murray-Darling Basin and in other irrigation areas around Australia. And we do observe some of those trends in our data. It is complicated at assessing what's going on in irrigation. I mean, if you look at the basin in particular, you don't just have trends in water use efficiency and technology. You've also got some big changes in activity mix. So you've got entirely new crops now being grown in the southern basin, like cotton, and big expansions in horticulture and almonds. So that kind of changes the balance at an aggregate level. And there's also this question about the new technologies. While you may improve water use efficiency, it doesn't necessarily always guarantee that you're going to reduce sensitivity. Some of the work that we've done looking at some of the investments in irrigation infrastructure, we can see that when farms can improve water use efficiency, their response may be to then plant, a bigger crop with the same amount of water. So yeah, there's probably a little bit more work done in that area, but I think it's pretty safe to say that those irrigation farms in that part of the world are still very sensitive to drought by its effect on water markets and prices.
Oh, that's interesting. Cindy, Cassidy, you've spoken a bit about the kind of innovation space you see yourself working in. How is the hub going to be different to other groups that are operating in a similar space, RDCs and things like that? How do you see your role fitting in with the others without overlapping?
We often refer to our role as being the glue or the bit that sticks it all together. So what we've got is some really strong operators in research investment at a state and local government level who are very effective in the space that they're in. And so we see our role as bringing those together. So how do we bring the learnings from those different organisations and those different pieces of activity together so that we can say, well, actually, this can be used somewhere differently and can have a bigger impact if we package it up together in that way. And so we've been working really closely with the RDCs and our other partners to say, well, how do we link the depth of knowledge and information that you've got with the other players in the ecosystem who need it and can make use of it? And so that's been I think a really liberating conversation to be having with all of them, because it opens up so many more opportunities. And I really think that's probably the ethos under which the hubs were created.
John McVeigh, if we can come to you, one of the things that's been talked about a bit too is how you can share data, how you can share initiatives and get a lot of farmers to actually use it and undertake some of that data, and the need for it to be user-friendly and I guess for it to be locally relevant too. How much of a challenge is that? How can you get around that?
It's a challenge. I think it's a tremendous opportunity, Nikolai, in the strategic planning and sort of co-design of our activities going forward in our hub right across the region that we've conducted over the last 6 months or so, Southern Queensland, Northern New South Wales. Access to trusted data came through as a key theme across every industry. I think as Cindy said earlier in this session, there's data coming at particularly producers and information coming at them from all angles. How do they sift through that? How do they prioritise that? How do they interpret that in relation to their own farms, their own districts? That's a common question coming through. So how do we do that? Obviously, there are the traditional extension methods that were largely carried out by state agencies in generations past. We haven't seen so much of that from that level. Commercial organisations have taken up over the last few decades in that regard. So it's about that on-ground, on-farm extension, the field days and that sort of face-to-face activity. But more particularly nowadays, given technology that's available, it's not only access through your own mobile phone, but it's the tools that are being developed. So many tools, UNE's Ag 360, for example, in relation to grazing opportunity management, climate prediction tools coming out from other universities, particularly my own university, University of Southern Queensland in Toowoomba. So our job as hubs, as Brent Finlay and his committee, as the Department Secretary, the Minister tell us, is to really focus not just on the R&D, but the EAC, extension, adoption, commercialisation. So we've got to be doing that in a way that's industry-led, that's community-led. That's the challenge for our universities in particular.
There's actually an interesting question that's come through that ties in really nicely with the points that you were just making, I think, particularly that kind of on-ground versus so much data coming through. The question says, we know that demonstration farms work, but how do we do that with increased concerns around things like biosecurity? Maybe people will be less willing to let people onto their properties. Is there a digital solution, or do you have to kind of have that physical presence so you can say, look, here's the proof right here, you can see it right there?
Sure. It's very much both. It's very much both. And of course, biosecurity issues, security issues in general are obviously top of mind as we go on to people's farms, their own properties, their own homes. So yes, it's a hybrid approach. It's taking every tool we have and continuing to develop those tools. Nikolai, not only is access to trusted data a key theme we've identified across our hub region, but it's the old connectivity question too. Sure, telecommunications, but also how can I connect with the people, be they commercial operators, be they universities, be they industry organisations, you name it, state government departments. So we're really, as Cindy said before, the glue, we're connectors, we're brokers, you name it. That's what we've really got to focus on.
Let's stay with tech for the moment. Neal, you mentioned a little earlier that ABARES is working on this drought early warning system. Can you tell us a bit more about that and how you think that could fit in with some of the discussions we've been having?
Yeah, so one of the key problems that emerged during the last drought was having good, accurate information on the extent and severity of drought. And it seems like something that would be a simple thing to solve, but it's proven to be quite a big challenge for many years. And I think there was almost a sense in which when we moved away from explicit drought support triggers going back the end of the EC system, that there was almost this reluctance to measure drought and to have a go at trying to predict it. But it is really important for the government's drought response and for industry to have an understanding, of drought impacts. And the idea behind the drought early warning system is to go a step beyond your traditional kind of rainfall meteorological based measures of drought and to try to look at drought specifically through a farm lens. So we're measuring drought in terms of its impact on farm businesses. So that drought indicator that I mentioned earlier is one of the indicators that we'd be hoping to provide in this new system. It's one of a number of indicators that we're hoping to incorporate along with some others that CSIRO are developing as well. And the basic idea is to leverage the BOM's seasonal forecasting capability. So they're now rolling out their new Access S2 forecasts covering 3 months ahead. So being able to build those weather forecasts into the drought indicators so that they're not just looking at what's happened in the past, but giving farmers and governments an idea of the risk that drought might happen in the future, and if we're in drought, the chance that it might end and when it might end. So I think this is a key thing that everyone wanted to get right following the last drought, was that we don't want to be kind of caught unawares. We want to know as soon as it's happening, or even better, before it's happening, if possible.
Now, I've just got a few moments left in this session, but given it is Outlook, we should probably look outwards and look forwards. Brent, Finlay, what is the Future Drought Fund looking at for the coming year?
Nikolai, rolling out more programs, which is really important, and some interesting programs. So ask people to watch the website, as I said before, to see what's coming up. That's really important. And I think it's continuing doing a detailed consultation around the country to keep people focusing on drought. And now's the opportunity to set yourselves up for the future, to be the best prepared you possibly can be, and also maintaining a clear focus that a lot of Australia is pretty good at the moment. The next drought's not that far away, so get ready.
Yeah, very, very good message. And just briefly, we'll ask John McVeigh and Cindy Cassidy the same. John McVeigh, what's on the cards for the coming year for you?
Well, very much buckling down into the on-ground work, Nikolai, with our partners that are participating in our hub, both commercial partners, research providers, you name it. We've got a wide array: remote area planning and development board, a local government-led board out at Longreach, for example, right through to Southern Cross University at Lismore. So really getting into the work with them. We will see an increased focus on relationships with the R&D corporations. We've already got a lot of discussions underway with MLA, GRDC, you name it. And I guess making sure as a hub we're linking in with other Future Drought Fund programs that Brent has talked about, drought resilient leaders, developing leaders of the future, right through to regional drought resilience planning supported by the various state governments. So plenty to do.
Thank you. And Cindy Cassidy?
What John said is what we're busy at. So yeah, the next 12 months are going to be really important in bedding down all of those relationships. Certainly with our hub, and I think that hubs generally, we've got a really strong people focus at our hub. So, really tapping into the principle we're operating on is that change only really happens when people change. So you only get things happening differently on a farm or in a farm business or in a community if people do something different. And so changing people becomes the most important piece of work for us. So we've got a range of activities lined up over the next 12, 18, 24 months, which are focused on how we make some fundamental provide an opportunity for fundamental change in the way that people approach agricultural innovation, how they think about what their future might look like and how they plan for and identify technologies, information systems that will take them to that new place. And so really that'll be our focus going forward, is how we make that kind of change at a really basic level.
Busy times ahead indeed. Well, does lead us to bring us to the end of our session. I'd like you to please at least virtually join me in thanking Neal Hughes, Senior Economist from ABARES, Brent Finlay, the Chair of the Future Drought Fund Consultative Committee, Professor John McVeigh, the Director of the Southern Queensland, Northern New South Wales Drought Resilience Adoption and Innovation Hub, and Cindy Cassidy from the Southern New South Wales Drought Resilience Adoption and Innovation Hub. I'll give you a round of applause because it feels a bit weird if people aren't clapping. So thank you very much to all of our speakers for that conversation. A short survey will pop up in a moment. If you'd like to give us your feedback, you can chat to Spotlight exhibitors. They'll be online for the next half hour, and you can get the conversation going too in the virtual networking room after this. So thank you very much for your time. Good afternoon.